So Steve, where's Steve? Yes, Steve, would you tell about guarding?
Yeah, so I became aware of kind of pervasive thoughts of I'm no good, and how I was just seeking its way into my life, and so pervasive, and talking to Chozen about that during Chozen, realized that I was clinging to that. In some way I found some safety in that. So Chozen asked me to do those questions. So the way I put it was, there's an element of letting my guard down in thinking about letting go of these thoughts of I'm no good. So Chozen asked me to consider what my life would be like if I let my guard down. And so I started to do that. And so I actually spent 5 minutes at the beginning of each period for a day or two considering that, actually thinking about that, and came up with a lot of positive effects that might come from that. And I only came up with one negative, and that is that I might get hurt. But that was outweighed by a lot of positive stuff. And so I started to consider, how can I let my guard down? And I've actually kind of started to internalize a vow to learn to do that and to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we develop these patterns of guarding ourselves from harm early in life, and then they become comforting in an odd way because they're familiar. And we're afraid to let them go, just as he described, beautifully described. But then, in the safety of a safe place, a safe container, Sesshin, then we can consider what if we can open a door and walk into a room of possibilities. What if I let this go? What would my life be like? And suddenly, very interesting. Very interesting. And it isn't safe. Life is not safe. Living human life is not safe. We could die at any time, right? It's not safe. But we could also have a lot more fun than we're having, and learn a lot more interesting things than we're learning, if we're willing to open the door and take a risk and walk out. So the last one, Deanne, would you tell briefly about cold?
Yeah, I kind of have aversion to coming and doing Sesshin because it's so cold here, and because we get limited sleep, and ended up coming to the realization, well, of course, the second night here, I wake up in the night, I'm freezing cold, and I can't sleep, because I start worrying that I'm not having enough sleep. And my heart was involved in the whole thing, eating irregularly, but it made me remember back to 20 years ago. I was really seriously ill, and I would go to bed at night, and I would just be freezing cold, and couldn't get warm. And the only way I could really control, I would have you just almost brought me to my knees, sort of chest pains. And the only thing I could really control was my sleep, and trying to bundle up and keep warm. And where that practice served me for many years as I healed, I have felt fairly well over the last few years, and I realized that practice of hanging on to that thought system of cold, being averse to cold, and always trying to manage my sleep, because if I do this and I can't do that, and if I can only sleep here, and that practice was still in my mind, and it wasn't serving me any longer.
So now she gets to look at, for example, one of the practices I assign Deanne, when you start to feel cold, and I know this too, because I have cold phenomenon, when you start to feel cold, instead of the mind grabbing onto the cold and then spinning down its cycle of, oh, there's something terrible is going to happen, blah, 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 always ending in death, to become aware of what's true. Is this really true? To ask that question, is this really true? Am I really cold? Like from the top of my hair down to the bottom of my toenails, am I cold? But when you really investigate it, it's not true. So maybe 10% is cold or cool, but there are many, many warm places in the body, maybe 90%. Then you shift your awareness to the 90% that's warm, and suddenly there's a whole different reality. So that's, again, it's just the door has opened, and then possibilities come forward, and a burden is lifted, a burden that we carry for years and years and years. Of this is what the mind's preoccupation is, I've got to save this being from suffering, and that's wonderful. And I've got to keep this being from dying, which is hopeless. And unfortunately, it's just taken over our reality with its neurosis about how to do that. And so when we practice, we can get some space around that and realize, oh, there are other possible ways of managing these things, of experiencing reality. So thank you for sharing, the three of you. Many other examples you could find out at lunch. Other types of magic at the monastery, one is that animals keep appearing. And at the beginning of Sesshin, a pigeon appeared, but not a park pigeon, a banded racing pigeon with bands on both of its legs. And we didn't quite know what to do about it. So I'm the only one who can use the web during Sesshin, so I went on the website and found out all about them. They only eat seeds of certain kinds. It said they will not recognize bread if you hit them on the head with it, because they haven't ever been fed bread. They don't recognize it as food, or pretzels or things like that. But we're tempted to feed them. So I brought some seeds out, and it gobbled up the seeds, came running over. And then I was doing some clay work, and I was spraying with a hose, and it came running over and needed to drink. And the website said they have to have at least an inch of water, has to be in a dish. They won't recognize it if it's not their dish. So you have to dribble the water so they hear the water, and sure enough came running over and took some long drink. So this pigeon hung around for 3 days. So I learned a lot about pigeons, which I'll tell you. I traced it through the bands. We got somebody, a young person with sharp eyes, to creep close enough to see what the band said. So the owner, whom I eventually contacted, gave me this information. She lives near Covington, Washington. It's east of Tacoma and Federal Way. The bird was involved in a race, was liberated they call it liberating, in Aurora, Oregon, about a 185-mile race. And she said it wasn't the only bird that was lost. The race was so bad that the rest of the season's races were closed. The Sunday before, they raced from Vancouver, Washington. The losses there were more than 50%. Also, and no one knows what the problem is. These are young birds. The ones you fed is only 5 months old, but our losses are usually not this high. He had done great. Coming from Vancouver, came in 7th place in the concourse and 5th in the club. So this is a club called the Centennial Club out of Tacoma. So this bird, we learned a lot about birds and how to take care of this particular kind of bird, and about this whole universe of raising pigeons, which we didn't know anything about. So that's also what happens when you're practicing, is you get curious about things, and a whole window opens into a universe that you don't. And she's offered to send us some baby birds if we want. Raise them. I don't think I want to be that involved in that universe. But I asked her, do you hatch them, or where do you get them from? And she said, you can get breeders and raise the babies yourself, but these breeders are also known as prisoners, because they can never be allowed to fly. They will attempt to find their way home where they were raised themselves. The easiest way to get weanlings who have never been out of their original loft, after just a couple of weeks being in a wire-enclosed area, they can be allowed to fly free. This is called settling.